In 1951, just 4 years before his death, Albert Einstein granted an interview that remained classified for decades. The most brilliant physicist in history revealed secrets about God, the soul, and eternity that shook the foundations of science and religion. Today, this lost document finally comes to light, showing thoughts he never dared make public. Journalist Michael Harrison found Einstein in his modest Princeton office, surrounded by blackboards filled with incomprehensible equations and towers of scientific papers. The aging genius, with his wild white hair and piercing eyes, seemed to carry the weight of the universe on his shoulders. Outside, autumn leaves danced in the wind, creating shadows that moved across the room like spirits seeking answers to eternal questions. Harrison began nervously, his hands trembling as he prepared his recording device. Einstein noticed and smiled gently, his eyes twinkling with that characteristic mixture of wisdom and mischief that had captivated the world for decades. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, as if the very air knew that profound truths were about to be unveiled. "Professor Einstein," Harrison started, "you have spent your entire life unlocking the mysteries of the physical universe. But what about the mysteries beyond physics? What do you truly believe about God?" Einstein leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling for what seemed like an eternity. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that seemed to come from the depths of space itself. "Michael, this is perhaps the most dangerous question you could ask me. The scientific community expects me to be a rational materialist. The religious community wants me to be a believer. But the truth is far more complex and beautiful than either side can imagine." He stood up slowly, walking to the window where the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the campus. "I have spent decades studying the fabric of reality, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that there is an intelligence behind the universe, not the anthropomorphic God of religions, but something far more profound, something that transcends our human understanding of consciousness and existence." Harrison felt his heart racing. This was not the Einstein the world knew, the one who spoke of God as a metaphor for the laws of nature. This was a man who had glimpsed something beyond the veil of physical reality. "But, Professor, your public statements have always suggested a more detached scientific view of divinity. Are you saying you have experienced something more personal?" Einstein turned from the window, his eyes now carrying a depth that seemed to penetrate the very soul of his interviewer. "Michael, what I am about to tell you must never be published during my lifetime. The implications are too dangerous, too revolutionary for our current understanding of reality." He paused, gathering his thoughts like a conductor preparing an orchestra for a symphony that would change the world. 3 years ago, while working on my unified field theory, I experienced something that shattered everything I thought I knew about existence. I was alone in this very room, deep in mathematical contemplation, when suddenly the equations began to reveal not just the structure of space and time, but the structure of consciousness itself. The room seemed to grow quieter, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Einstein continued, his voice now barely above a whisper. Michael, I actually saw the interconnectedness of all things, not as a philosophical concept, but as a mathematical reality. Every particle, every wave, every thought, every emotion, all connected in a vast web of consciousness that spans not just space, but time itself. Harrison struggled to maintain his composure. The greatest scientific mind of the century was describing what sounded like a mystical experience. "Professor, are you saying that consciousness is fundamental to the universe, that it exists beyond the physical brain?" Einstein sat back down, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for his pipe. "Michael, what we call the soul is not a religious fairy tale. It is a quantum field of information that exists in the fabric of space-time itself. When we die, this field does not disappear. It cannot disappear. It is woven into the very structure of reality." The implications of these words hung in the air like a revelation that could reshape humanity's understanding of life and death. Einstein continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I have calculated the mathematics of consciousness, and the results are undeniable. The information that makes up our awareness, our memories, our very essence, exists in a dimension beyond the physical. Death is not an ending, Michael. It is a transition." Harrison felt tears welling up in his eyes. "Professor, if this is true, if consciousness survives death, what does this mean for how we should live our lives?" Einstein stood up again, this time moving to one of his blackboards. With chalk in hand, he began drawing equations that seemed to dance with life. This is perhaps the most important question of all, Michael. If we are eternal beings, if our consciousness is part of the cosmic web, then every action, every thought, every moment of love or hatred ripples through the fabric of existence forever. He turned to face Harrison directly, his eyes now burning with an intensity that was almost frightening. We are not separate beings struggling alone in a cold universe. We are expressions of a single, infinite consciousness experiencing itself through billions of individual perspectives. When you hurt another person, you are literally hurting yourself. When you love, you are adding to the total love in the universe, and that love is eternal. The room seemed to vibrate with the power of these words. Harrison felt as if he was witnessing the birth of a new understanding of reality itself. Professor, this sounds almost like what mystics and spiritual teachers have been saying for centuries. Einstein smiled, a smile that seemed to contain the wisdom of the ages. Michael, the greatest tragedy of human civilization is the artificial separation between science and spirituality. They are not opposites. They are different languages describing the same magnificent reality. The mystics have always known what I have now proven mathematically. We are one consciousness, experiencing itself subjectively through countless individual forms. He walked back to the window, gazing out at the students walking across the campus, each one carrying within them the spark of infinite consciousness. The universe is not a machine, Michael. It is a living, breathing, conscious entity, and we are its thoughts made manifest. Every star, every planet, every blade of grass, every human being is the universe becoming aware of itself. Harrison felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was hearing. Professor, if this is true, what happens to us after death? Where do we go? Einstein turned back to his interviewer, his expression now peaceful, almost serene. We do not go anywhere, Michael, because we are already everywhere. Death is like a wave returning to the ocean. The wave may disappear, but the water remains. We are waves in the ocean of consciousness, and when our physical form dissolves, we return to the infinite sea from which we came. He paused, looking down at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. But here is the beautiful mystery, Michael. We do not lose our individuality. We expand it. We become more than we ever were as separate beings. We become part of the eternal dance of creation itself. The sun was setting now, casting the room in a golden light that seemed to make everything glow with inner radiance. Einstein continued, his voice now filled with a joy that was almost childlike. I have seen glimpses of this eternal realm, Michael. It is more beautiful than anything we can imagine. It is pure love, pure creativity, pure understanding, and we are all destined to return there, not as strangers, but as long-lost children coming home. Harrison felt his worldview crumbling and rebuilding itself in real time. Professor, this changes everything. If people knew this, if they truly understood that consciousness survives death, that we are all connected, it would transform civilization itself. Einstein nodded gravely. Yes, Michael, and that is why this knowledge is so dangerous. Humanity is not ready for this truth. We are still primitive beings driven by fear and separation. If this information were released prematurely, it could cause chaos, could be misused by those who seek power over others. He walked to his desk and picked up a letter, holding it as if it contained the weight of the world. I have been in correspondence with other scientists who have made similar discoveries. We have agreed to keep this knowledge secret until humanity evolves enough to handle it responsibly. But I wanted to leave this record, this testimony, for future generations who might be ready to understand. The interview continued for hours, with Einstein revealing mathematical proofs of consciousness survival, describing the multidimensional nature of reality, and explaining how love is literally the fundamental force that holds the universe together. He spoke of reincarnation not as a religious belief, but as a scientific fact, describing how consciousness chooses different physical forms to experience different aspects of existence. Michael, Einstein said, his voice becoming more urgent, the equations show that what we call past, present, and future are illusions. All moments exist simultaneously in the eternal now. This means that every person who has ever lived, every moment of joy or sorrow, every act of love or kindness, exists forever in the infinite tapestry of space-time. Harrison leaned forward, captivated by every word. Professor, are you saying that our loved ones who have passed away still exist somewhere, Einstein's eyes filled with a light that seemed to come from another dimension. They do not exist somewhere else, Michael. They exist here, now, in the eternal present. The separation we feel is an illusion created by our limited perception. In the higher dimensions of consciousness, we are all together, always have been, always will be. He moved closer to the blackboard, drawing interconnected circles and lines that seemed to pulse with meaning. Look at these equations, Michael. They show that consciousness is not produced by the brain, as materialists believe. The brain is simply a receiver, like a radio tuning into different frequencies of awareness. When the radio breaks, the music does not disappear. It continues to exist in the electromagnetic field, waiting for another receiver to pick it up. Harrison stared at the diagrams, trying to comprehend their profound implications. Professor, if consciousness is independent of the brain, what about memory? What about personality? Do these survive death as well? Einstein laughed, a sound filled with genuine delight. Michael, you are asking the right questions. Memory and personality are like software programs running on the hardware of consciousness. When we die, the hardware returns to the cosmic mainframe, but the software, the unique pattern of our individual existence, is preserved forever in the quantum field. He began pacing around the room, his excitement growing with each step. But here is the most remarkable discovery of all. We do not just survive death as static entities. We continue to grow, to learn, to evolve. Death is not the end of our journey. It is graduation to a higher level of existence. The room was now filled with the energy of revelation, as if the very atoms were vibrating with newfound understanding. Einstein continued, his voice carrying the authority of absolute certainty. In my calculations, I have discovered what I call the consciousness constant, a fundamental value that governs how awareness interfaces with physical reality. This constant proves that consciousness is not an emergent property of complex matter, but rather matter is an emergent property of consciousness. Harrison felt as if his mind was expanding to accommodate these revolutionary concepts. Professor, if consciousness is primary, if it creates matter rather than the other way around, what does this say about the nature of God? Einstein stopped pacing and turned to face his interviewer with an expression of profound reverence. Michael, consciousness in its purest form, undifferentiated and infinite, is what we have always called God, not a being separate from creation, but the very essence of existence itself. We are not separate from God. We are God experiencing itself through individual perspectives. He walked to another blackboard and began writing equations that seemed to glow with inner light. These calculations show that every conscious being is a unique lens through which the infinite can know itself. Your consciousness, my consciousness, the consciousness of every person who has ever lived or ever will live, are all facets of the same divine awareness. The implications of these words seemed to transform the very air in the room. Harrison could feel something fundamental shifting in his understanding of reality. Professor, if we are all aspects of the same divine consciousness, what about evil? What about suffering? How do these fit into this cosmic picture? Einstein set down his chalk and turned to face the window, where the last rays of sunlight were painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Michael, this is perhaps the most difficult aspect of the truth to accept. Evil and suffering are not mistakes or accidents. They are necessary contrasts that allow consciousness to fully experience and understand itself. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Without darkness, light has no meaning. Without sadness, joy cannot be fully appreciated. Without fear, courage cannot exist. The infinite consciousness chooses to experience these contrasts through us, not as punishment, but as the only way to achieve complete self-understanding. Harrison struggled with the implications of this revelation. But, Professor, are you saying that all the pain and suffering in the world is somehow justified? That seems almost cruel. Einstein turned back to his interviewer, his eyes now filled with infinite compassion. Michael, from our limited human perspective, suffering seems meaningless and cruel, but from the perspective of eternal consciousness, every experience, no matter how painful, contributes to the total understanding of existence. And here is the most important point. All suffering is temporary, but the wisdom gained from it is eternal. He moved to his desk and pulled out a photograph of children playing in a garden. Look at these children, Michael. They cry when they fall and scrape their knees. But 5 minutes later, they are laughing and playing again. From their perspective, the pain was real and important, but from our adult perspective, we know it was temporary and ultimately insignificant. This is how our earthly sufferings appear from the perspective of eternal consciousness. The photograph seemed to illustrate perfectly the point Einstein was making. Harrison found himself beginning to understand the cosmic perspective that the great physicist was describing. "Professor, if all of this is true, how should this knowledge change the way we live our daily lives?" Einstein sat down heavily in his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 72 years. "Michael, this is the question that has haunted me since my revelation. Knowing the truth about consciousness and eternity is both the greatest blessing and the greatest burden imaginable." He stared out the window at the now darkening sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. On one hand, this knowledge eliminates all fear. Death becomes not an enemy to be feared, but a friend to be welcomed when the time comes. Separation becomes an illusion. Loss becomes impossible, because nothing real can ever be lost. His voice grew stronger as he continued. But on the other hand, this knowledge brings tremendous responsibility. Every thought, every action, every moment of consciousness creates ripples in the fabric of eternity. We can no longer live carelessly, thinking our choices do not matter. Everything matters. Everything is eternal. Harrison leaned forward, hungry for more of this life-changing wisdom. "Professor, what specific changes would you recommend? How should someone live with this knowledge?" Einstein smiled, and for a moment his face seemed to radiate the same light as the stars outside. "First, Michael, love becomes not just an emotion, but a sacred duty. When you truly understand that harming another is literally harming yourself, when you realize that every act of kindness reverberates through eternity, love becomes the only rational response to existence." He stood up and walked to his bookshelf, pulling down a worn copy of Spinoza's Ethics. "Second, fear becomes obsolete. Fear of death, fear of loss, fear of failure, all these fears are based on illusions. When you know you are eternal, when you understand that you are an expression of infinite consciousness itself, what is there to fear?" Opening the book to a page marked with a faded ribbon, he read aloud, "The more clearly you understand yourself and your emotions, the more you become a lover of what is." He looked up at Harrison. "Spinoza understood what I have now proven mathematically. We are not separate beings struggling against an indifferent universe. We are the universe coming to know itself through conscious experience." The room was now filled with the gentle glow of lamplight, creating an atmosphere of intimate revelation. Einstein continued, his voice taking on the quality of a teacher sharing the most important lesson of all. "Third, Michael, purpose becomes clear. We are here to experience, to learn, to grow, and to love. Every moment of consciousness, every relationship, every challenge is an opportunity for the infinite to understand itself more completely through us." He closed the book and held it against his chest. "But perhaps most importantly, we must live with joy. Not the shallow happiness that comes from getting what we want, but the deep joy that comes from knowing what we truly are. We are eternal beings having a temporary human experience, and that experience is sacred." Harrison felt tears streaming down his face, though he could not say whether they were tears of joy or overwhelming awe. "Professor, this interview has changed my life, but I am struggling with one final question. If this knowledge is so powerful, so transformative, why has it been hidden? Why do people not know these truths?" Einstein walked over to Harrison and placed both hands on his shoulders, looking directly into his eyes with an intensity that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "Michael, consciousness evolves just as physical forms evolve. Humanity as a whole is not yet ready for this knowledge. We are still in our spiritual infancy, still learning the basic lessons of compassion and wisdom." He released his grip and moved to the window, gazing up at the stars that were now clearly visible in the night sky. "But the time is coming, Michael. A new age of consciousness is dawning. More and more individuals are having experiences like mine, are discovering the truth of what we are. Eventually, this knowledge will become common, and when it does, it will transform human civilization beyond recognition." The interview was drawing to a close, but Einstein had one final revelation to share. "Michael, I want to tell you about the most extraordinary experience I had during my consciousness exploration." 3 months ago, I was working late in this office when suddenly I found myself in direct communion with what I can only describe as the mind of God itself. The room seemed to hold its breath as Einstein continued. It was not a vision or a dream, but a direct knowing that bypassed all sensory input. I experienced the birth of stars, the formation of galaxies, the emergence of life on countless worlds. But more than that, I felt the joy of infinite consciousness as it discovered itself through every possible form of existence. Harrison could barely speak. "Professor, what did this experience teach you about the ultimate purpose of everything?" Einstein's voice became soft, almost reverent. "Michael, the purpose of existence is beauty. Not just aesthetic beauty, but the beauty of consciousness, knowing itself completely. Every sunset, every piece of music, every act of love, every moment of understanding between conscious beings adds to the total beauty of existence. We are not accidents in a meaningless universe. We are the universe's way of creating and experiencing beauty." As the evening reached its end, Einstein walked Harrison to the door one final time. The professor's face was peaceful, glowing with the inner light of someone who had touched the infinite and returned to share its wisdom. "Michael," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute truth, "when you publish this interview someday, remember that you are not just sharing information. You are planting seeds of consciousness that will grow in the minds of those ready to receive them. Some will dismiss these ideas as fantasy, but others will recognize the truth and be transformed by it." He paused, looking out at the star-filled sky. "The future of humanity depends on this transformation of consciousness. When enough people understand what we truly are, when enough individuals live from the perspective of eternal awareness, we will create a world of unimaginable beauty and peace." With those final words, Einstein closed the door, leaving Harrison standing in the hallway with a recording that contained perhaps the most important conversation in human history. The journalist walked out into the night, forever changed by what he had heard, carrying within him the seeds of a new understanding that would someday transform the world. This forbidden interview remained hidden for decades, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. Now, as humanity stands on the threshold of a new age of consciousness, these words of the greatest scientific mind in history offer us a glimpse into the true nature of reality and our place within it. Share this incredible revelation with others who are ready to hear it. Like and subscribe for more hidden truths that could change everything, and comment below with your thoughts on Einstein's forbidden knowledge about consciousness, God, and the eternal nature of the human soul.